Hi, I'm Vincent Nestler,
And I'm Zoe Fowler.
and we're going to talk to you about the CAE community approach to having competency in the classroom and the curriculum.
I want to start with thinking about where we are in terms of cybersecurity. So as I understand it, Vinny, we've got a fairly complicated and wide-ranging set of problems. I know that when we look at policy, according to CyberSeek, between September 22 and August 2023, there were only 72 cybersecurity workers for every 100 positions available. And that must be an issue of national security, I'm imagining. And we're also trying at a policy level to anticipate this changing ecosystem which we have around new technologies, new threats, and of course AI coming into the picture.
Absolutely.
When we think about it from an employer perspective, I've done some case study research talking to a variety of employers across the US, from small employers through to really large organizations, and also talking to federal employers there as well as industry. And in those case study conversations, I heard over and again that employers are struggling to recruit the right people for the right jobs. There's a problem that resumes don't always reflect what people can do. Applicants often appear to have the knowledge and skills, but aren't able to mobilize them within the workplace. And the wrong people are going into jobs, which means there's high rate of attrition because they're not thriving within that environment. And the feedback I got from employers is that they want increased cooperation across all the different stakeholders in cybersecurity, employment, and education. They want more focus on professional skills, and I know that's something we talk about later on in this video. And they want more ways for students to gain an understanding of the workplace so that they can make realistic and well-informed career choices. And I know that's something we're going to be talking about later as well. And then with students, I'm aware you've done some research with students, and I wondered if you could talk about that, because this is part of the problem as well.
So I assume you're referring to the research with the career fairs.
Yes.
So as yet unpublished, but research done at career fairs, virtual career fair, students were given a survey to ask for and asked 4 questions. The 4 questions were: 1, name 3 work roles. 2, name 3 tasks for each of those work roles you identified. 3, have you done any of those tasks you listed? And 4, if you did them, where did you do them? Here's what we found. Out of 1,300 people surveyed, only 600 could name 3 work roles.
Wow.
So people are thinking, oh, I'm going into cybersecurity, I'm doing cybersecurity. Well, there's 52 work roles in the NICE framework. Which of the 52 are you using? So only half could name 3. Of the 600 that named 3, only half of those could name 3 tasks per work role. Only half. So maybe they could name the work roles, but they couldn't really articulate what it was that they were expected to do in each of those work roles. Now, where it gets interesting is the people who were able to identify 3 work roles, for 3 tasks for their work roles, had actually done the tasks. So clearly, if you've done the tasks, if you've actually done work in the context of a work role, you're more likely to remember that's what you do in that work role.
So we have students studying cybersecurity thinking they'll get a job at the end of their degree, but not really understanding what kind of jobs they might do.
Right, and when you take the spectrum of how many work roles there are, there's some students are more technical and really want to get into the weeds. Some are more policy oriented, want to work with people, and there are people that are in between. And generally people who are more technical become miserable when they do policy, and the people who are doing policy become miserable when they have to do something technical in general. But the last thing we found was that with the last question, most of the people who got the experience did not get the experience in the classroom. So they had done the task, but they did it on the job training. They built a server in the house and started working on it there. They were in a club or something, but they didn't do it it wasn't part of their curriculum.
So one of the things that we might be thinking about today is how to bring some of those valuable experiences into the delivery within the classroom for the benefit of our students.
Absolutely.
And the other thing I hear over and again from educators is that our students are often not being able to get those first jobs that they need for their career because they're not seen to have the experience which the employers are wanting their new entrants to have. So therefore, although our students are coming into a workplace where they see all these job vacancies, they're not able to get any of those jobs. And again, that's a significant problem if we've got a deficit in the workplace, but we also are not being able to get our students into that workplace.
The students find that as a catch-22. So they'll say, I want to apply for a particular job, and they'll say, you requires 3 years, 5 years experience. It's like, well, I just got out of college. How can I get that job if I don't have the experience? And I think one of the things that we can do in the CAE community is start to give students experience doing certain tasks as it relates to work roles. So when they go, they're like, well, I don't have 3 years of work experience, but I have done the work and I can demonstrate it, I can explain it, I can talk to you about it.
They're going to be able to convince the employer that they're the right person.
Absolutely.
And they're also going to understand the kind of jobs that they want to get. Finally, I just want to say, so stakeholders, we've talked there about policymakers, we've talked about employers, and we've talked about students. But I also think educators are key stakeholders within all of this, and they're also being challenged. They're being asked to bring more and more into cybersecurity curriculum, but it's not clear what they should let go of. And as I understand it, cybersecurity is a relatively new academic discipline. It's trying to respond to this changing ecosystem of technologies and threats, but educators presumably can't do all of this by themselves.
No, and that's why one of our approaches with the CAE community is to incorporate many other experiences, whether it's apprenticeships, internships, competitions are very big and often provides a student great material to discuss and show animation in their job interviews.
So academic excellence might be about bringing a lot of these experiences in as centres of academic excellence. Okay, so we've got that problem and we've got that range of stakeholders, and you and I have been working together for a few years now. Mm-hmm. And what I was hoping we'd do is you would explain a little bit, the nature of this is training video, talk about the solution that we've come up with and how that might work.
So first part of the CAE community was having a working group to address the issue of competency and making sure the students could be competent. And the results of the working group and their efforts over really several years has been to come up with a definition of competency. For the purposes of the CAE community, the definition of competency that we use is competency is the ability for the student to complete a task in the context of a work role.
Which sounds very simple,
Mm-hmm.
but I wonder if we can break it down a little bit further. So if we've got competency as the ability for the student to complete a task in the context of a work role, can you explain specifically what you mean by work role? Is that the same as perhaps a job position advertised in an advertisement somewhere?
Work role is a term used by the NICE framework and by the DoD DCWF. And they're titles for positions that a person would be hired to work in an organization. Now, the titles that we're using for work role are specific to those documents. However, the public sector or the private sector may have different names for their job positions as opposed to what we're calling work roles, but it's the same concept, right? You know, when I hire you as a system administrator, network operator, cyber defense analyst, and so on, right? But those titles may be slightly different or very different depending on where you work. Also, if you're in a very small organization, as you brought up before, one person wears many hats. So
Jack of all trades.
So it's not that these work roles and the tasks listed are in stone, and this is what, if you do these tasks, you're specifically that. But the work roles inform us as to the groups of tasks that need to be done to provide certain functions to an organization.
So we've got the DoD's DCWF, and I know that they have 54 work roles described there. We have the NICE framework, which currently has 52 work roles, but that's going to change, right?
That's right. I think it was 52. DCWF at one point was 72, but now it's 54. So
according to the website,
right.
But I know that in discussions,
the numbers will change, and I think part of it is some work roles get split up into more, or some work roles are being consolidated into one. The cybersecurity landscape is constantly changing. It's still evolving, right? Mm-hmm. And so, so the numbers of the work roles in the workforce frameworks may change, but almost always the tasks will remain the same. The tasks may wind up in a different work role, but somebody's got to configure the network, somebody's got to add the user, somebody's got to audit the network, there's things that must be done. So those tasks will remain. Which heading of work role they fall under may change.
Okay, so let's just clarify that then. So we have task within our statement as well, to complete a task in the context of a work role. And I know that if our viewers look at either the DCWF or the NICE framework, they're going to see beneath those work roles a list of knowledge, skills, and tasks. So are we looking at all of that, or are we just looking at tasks?
No, for the purposes of the CAE community, dealing with competency, giving the students competency experience, creating competency statements, we're only looking at the task. The knowledge and skills that are listed there are useful for perhaps the development of classes, or making sure the experiences the students get prior to doing the competency experience is useful, but that's not what we're paying attention to. And many of the knowledge and skills that are listed in the frameworks are already in the curriculum, especially as a CAE community. The knowledge units, you'll see many of the knowledge units mapped to many, if not most, of the knowledge and skills listed in those workforce frameworks.
I think that's really helpful. So we've got competencies, the ability for student to complete a task in the context of work role. And a task is something which is visible, that we can see our students actually doing. Mm-hmm. It's something which they perform. And you talked about the fact that we came up with a definition, and then I believe there are 5 essential elements, those key ingredients which are part of every competency. And what I'd like to do now is to go on and talk about those. Okay.
So the competency statement has 5 essential elements. We use the word essential because each of these elements are essential. All of them have to be included as part of the statement. So here they are. Actor is the first one. Behavior, context, degree, and employability. Mm-hmm. They make up the very easy to remember acronym A, B, C, D, and E. So those are the 5 elements. I'd like to share a little more about
Excellent.
Each.
Yes, please do.
A is for actor, and that's who's actually exhibiting the competency, the person that we're watching, the student or participant in whatever the activity is.
Okay, and when I think about CAE community, I think about everything from entry-level courses where we might have somebody returning to education or somebody straight out of high school, through to perhaps the kind of projects that you're doing after 2 years, or a capstone project after 4 years, or a master's level student. And I guess they have very different levels of knowledge and skills and abilities within that. So how much information do we need to bring into a description of the actor? Do we just need to know their entry level or their master's level? Or would you want them also to have some description of the previous courses which they've done?
So to not make the statement so onerous that it has every particular of the background for the person who's doing the
Everything
competency.
they've done since they were 5
Right.
years old, every
Exactly.
certificate, yeah.
So that it's not so onerous. All that is required is any particular background that's necessary for a person who's reading the competency to know that the person should have that background in order to do the task. So for example, I might say the student is in an intro to networking, is in a cybersecurity program, in a networking class, and maybe that's it because they're doing basic networking troubleshooting.
Okay.
But conversely, I might say this is a student who's in a 4-year program, is in a capstone class, and this is for the culminating activity, right? So this gives me the idea that, okay, if they're in the capstone class for a 4-year cybersecurity program, I can reasonably expect that they got all of the basic foundational knowledge necessary to do this piece.
And simply, if they needed something like to be able to use Linux or to be able to use CAE, that would be specified within that as well.
Yes.
Because if they didn't have those skills, they wouldn't be able to do the competency.
Correct.
Okay.
So anything that you think is necessary for them to understand, this is what they should at least have so that they can perform the competency, the task reasonably.
Yeah. So the kind of knowledge and skills they would need to have as ammunition to be able to mobilize within that competency.
This actually brings up a good point as we're discussing this that I think I'd like to mention now, which should carry through the rest of the discussion, which is as we're developing these competencies, over time, we may start to be more precise about, you must say, what courses they took, what prerequisites. Maybe there'll be something that comes out in the future. But for right now, as we're talking about this and the folks that are watching this, just relax. You're just writing competencies. We're drafting these out. We're trying to explain it. As we look at the competencies, we might say, we need a little more information here, or maybe that was more information than we needed. Nobody's going to be judged so harshly when you create these competency statements, whether you stated certain things so perfectly. The importance of the competency statement arguably is not the competency statement, it's the experience the students wind up having.
Okay.
And these essential elements help us to create the experience for the student, but it allows other CAE community schools to read the statement and say, oh, I think I would like to do that. That would fit in my program. Let me try and do that also, since it has such good value.
And that's going to be something we return to later in the video as well, about who might be making use of these competency statements. So when we think about the actor, we're probably not just going to say student. We're just going to give a little bit more information to just contextualize what's happening here. So that's our A. Let's go on to B.
So B is the behavior. And behavior is essentially the task taken straight out of the workforce framework, whichever one that you're using. You're just taking that task from whatever work role and putting it into B. This is the task that they have to do. Diagnose and troubleshoot network connectivity issues. Write a report for senior management to explain options for purchasing equipment, something like that.
So this is the task which is referenced in the definition we've used at the start, and it's taken from the work role description from either the NICE framework or the DCWF framework.
That's correct.
That feels very easy. And then C.
C is the context. So context is probably one of the essential elements that helps to give life to the task. So many people may already be doing activities with their students that are close, if not already, competency-based experiences that will work perfectly well. Mm-hmm. But sometimes what's missing is the context, where you might have a student do a task but never mention to them, by the way, if you are able to complete this, you might be a system administrator, you might be a cyber defense analyst, you might be an IT auditor, or you might at least consider that if you really liked doing this, this is the kind of thing that they do.
Okay.
And you might add some flavor to it where you are enrolled as an IT auditor. Before you can bring the system online, you need the IT auditor too, and then you give some story to it, and that helps give more meaning to what they're doing as opposed to it's just another assignment that I'm submitting.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So it's making it more realistic. It's bringing in that idea of in the context of a work role. So for me, when I think about ABC, I'm thinking about A as who is our student who is going to be doing this activity. B is what are they doing? This is taken directly from the task within a work role framework. And then C is how are they doing this? How are they enacting this behavior? How are they enacting this text? So when we think about condition, we're not only thinking about the story, or perhaps alongside thinking about story, we're also thinking about specifying the technology that a student has been given, specifying any limitations that might be in place, and describing that scenario. So when I look at competency statements, for example, the student might be given a network map or a particular report, in this instance of harassing emails or a PCAP file. And there will be ways when we look to share competency statements, which we're going to talk about later, where we can add those as attached files to the competency statement to really bring in that rich description so that we can really understand how a student has enacted that behavior or task. So we've talked about A, B, and C. Could you talk a little bit about D?
Yes, so D is evaluating the work that's produced, the task that was done, for how complete, how correct, how long did it take. Any mixture of those, it doesn't have to be all three of them. It depends on what the task is and what's appropriate for the measurement for it. And something that's important to keep in mind about degree as it applies to the CAE community and we're doing competency statements. The degree that you choose for your students, how fast should it be done? How should it be done at night, in the dark, machine gun fire overhead, no tools, no internet, whatever however you're evaluating them is particular to you and your school. So when we create a competency statement, no one has to look at the competency statement and say, oh, they're doing it under 30 minutes. I don't think my students would do it in maybe an hour. That's fine. Whatever you choose for those, that's fine. This is not a standardized, when you create a competency, it doesn't become a standard that everybody has to use. When you create the competency, you'll see degree and you'll say, you know what, I'm gonna tweak that. So I just want to say that up front, because I know sometimes people think, well, the measurement becomes a very sticky point, but this is how well do you expect them to be able to do this?
And one of the things that you've often said, which I think is really helpful for me, is when we think about degree, we're thinking, would it be good enough for an employer? Would somebody pay for you to have done this in this period of time or with this level of accuracy or completion? And that always strikes me as part of a cultural shift we're needing to make here. This is not going to be replacing the GPA or the academic model where we tend to grade students for their individual work with the idea of being able to get 100%. But this is kind of augmenting that by thinking less about the academic standard just in terms of competency, and thinking more about, would somebody hire you to do this? Would this be good enough for an employer? And I know for myself, when I've worked within industry, nobody's been giving me a GPA for my work. They've been evaluating me in terms of, am I good enough for that organization? So when you're talking about degree, you're trying to get us to think, as educators, we're thinking a little bit about employers.
Yes, and I think I would agree with that statement. When you ask the student to do a task in the context of a work role, and you're looking at the degree, if the context was you're asking to, say, troubleshoot a network, and there's only 2 computers with 1 cable in between, that's not really, that doesn't approach anything close to realistic that an organization would want.
Yeah.
Does that mean you need to have 100 computers on a network that you're troubleshooting? No. But 2 with 1 cable is not very realistic. So you want to try and expose them to tasks that when an employer sees them do it, it's like, okay, that's a smaller network than I would work on. But if you could do that, I know I can get you to do the thing I need on my network.
That's really helpful, thank you. So we've got A for the actor, the who, B for the task and the work role, the what, C for the context of the activity, the how, and D, in many ways, is a measure of that, how much. And I'm going to butt in now, if that's okay,
Please.
for a little bit, because the thing I'm passionate about is E, and E is for employability. And when I was talking earlier about the conversations that I've had with employers, the case study research I've done, they've talked a lot about the need for those, what some people call softer skills, what I would call professional skills, what some people call just being human. The idea of communication, collaboration, ethics, integrity, critical thinking, problem solving. These elements of working, not just doing the technical, but working within an organization, understanding what you need to do to work as part of a team or what you need to do to be able to solve a problem. And when we think about employability, I think we're thinking about within our competency activity, our competency experience that we've designed, are we providing our students with the opportunity to demonstrate and develop some of those employability skills, those professional skills, which they're going to need as currency, really, in the workplace?
So when you're developing a competency statement or competency-based experience for your students, you want to give some thought to how do I create the conditions for this activity such that it requires things like critical thinking, problem solving, teamwork, written communication, oral communication, things of that nature that aren't separate but are organic to the activity. Right? So we might say, okay, I want to see you write a paper. Okay, great, you have your writing. Okay, I want you to fix this network. It's another story to say, okay, I want you to work on the network, then write a report in a way that I, as a person who maybe is not as technical, can understand what you did and what needs to happen in the future, right? So when we talk about employability, and it is an essential element, it's important that you try to create the competency experience in a way that will incorporate having to do some of those skills that we call, that fall under employability, like written communication, oral communication, and things of that nature. And
we have a list for those which we're working with as well. We're part of the Careers Preparation National Centre within the CAE community. And as part of that, we've been working with Montreat. And Montreat have a list of what they call the 360-degree competencies, that notion of being an all-rounder. And they break that down. And we're giving a link to that at the end of our presentation. And that makes me think, Vinny, about all the times when we've been talking, an educator said, oh, we've got this student who's wonderful at technical, but I'd never give them a job because they can't communicate, as though that is an innate trait which they should have. And one of the things that excites me about our competency work is if we can provide experiences, we can help that student who's brilliant at technical, but maybe not employable because of their communication. We can help them develop those communication skills through having them built into the competency experience, or we can help them learn to collaborate as part of a group, or we can work on the ethics part, quite important in cybersecurity as well.
For all the 5 elements, we call them essential, right? They're essential. They're not something that, I'm not going to do this or I won't include that. They all 5 need to be part of your statement and part of the...
They're not an optional add-on when we're talking about competency.
Correct. Or I mean, it's not an option. I mean, it's an option, but then it's not a competency experience as we call it in the CAE community, right? Of course, people can teach whatever they want or however they want in their classroom, but when we're talking about building competency experiences, we want to make sure that you're including some what we call employability elements. I've been to many job fairs, both virtual and in person, and every single time I go, when I talk to employers, I'll hear something like, that student was great, but a little awkward communicating, or was a little pompous, or just didn't come across the way they needed to, and as a result lost a very good position with a very good company or agency. It happens all the time. So I think that's something else that having that employability piece helps us to at least start to address as well. And I think this leads into something else to consider when we're talking about the competencies as a whole, or the elements as a whole. So if you look at the 5 elements, A, B, C, D, and E. A, B, and C are descriptions. They're the description of the event that's taking place that the student will do. And this is good because this helps the student if they look at the competency to be able to articulate, this is what I did, right? D and E are the quantitative and the qualitative evaluation of what the outcome was. So this basically is a catch-all, right? So if they're doing something, you're either quantitatively measuring them or qualitative measuring them. And if you come up with something that's not listed in, say, the Montreat list, or you come up with some other measure that you want to measure, it'll almost certainly fit into either quantitative or qualitative. And so you have, even though these are essential elements, you have a wide berth to implement the education the way you want.
Thank you. So what we've done in this part of the video is introduce you to the definition we've built, that competency is the ability for the student to complete a task within the context of a work role. We've talked about the 2 work role frameworks which we're using and identified the tasks listed within those. And we've talked about the essential elements of A, B, C, D, E. In the next part of this video, we're going to give some examples of competency statements, drawing upon your own work, Vinny, looking at competency statements which other people have developed. And then towards the end of this video, we're going to talk about what we can do with those and how they might be useful in addressing the problem which we described at the start. So Vinny, we've talked about the A, B, C, D, E, and we've talked about definition. And what we're going to do now is actually have a look at one of the competency statements that you've developed from some of your teaching.
Yes. Okay. So one of the courses that I teach at Cal State is the capstone class. And so this is a class that tries to incorporate all the things they learned throughout their experience in the IST program and bring it together in one experience. And the way we've developed the class is really ripe for exhibiting competencies as the CAE community has defined it. And I think many folks in the CAE community are doing similar types of projects, so I think this might lend itself to help other people think about how to create competency statements. And as you saw, I just kind of put this together right now. Wasn't a heavy lift. It was actually pretty quick to get it out into the format that we have. Mm-hmm. So first, with the ABCDE, we start with actor. You'll see it's an undergraduate student in a capstone class. So by saying they're the student in a capstone class, you could just finish there, right? We already know that the student is an undergraduate student in a capstone class in a cybersecurity and IST program. That pretty much tells us we can expect that they have what we would expect to happen in an IST program, basic networking, Linux, Windows, or whatever is part of your curriculum. And really, that also is captured in many of the KUs that are in the CAE KUs for when you go through designation. So it could be as simple as that. You can add a little bit more, but it's that covers actor. Mm-hmm. Often I like to do A, C, B, D, E. Just because sometimes after you know who's doing it, it's nice to know what the scenario is. So let me jump right to condition, and then the behavior will make sense.
Yeah.
So because it's a capstone class, the students are put into groups of 4, and they're given certain technology, certain documents. So the technology they're given, the team is given a network of about 10 devices, servers, workstations, routers, a firewall, and a mix of Windows and Linux. And with that network, the document they're given is a list of requirements of what they need to do on the network. So for example, they need to install servers, they need to set up a web server, they need to set up account management, they need to set up things like network monitoring and things of that nature. So it's a long list, and they have 10 weeks as a team to get it up and running. At the end of the 10 weeks, they get penetration tested by the pen testing class. So there's a very hard stop time constraint on all the tasks that they need to get done. One of the requirements is to set up Active Directory. And so one of the students in the team of 4 working the team to get all of these requirements done on that network will have to set up the Active Directory. And that's the task, set up the Active Directory, which relates to the DCWF task 1153A, install, update, and troubleshoot systems/servers. So Active Directory is arguably a system type or server. They're installing it, and they're also doing much more. So, which leads to the behavior that's listed in the DCWF is what we're using as the base. Mm-hmm. How we instantiate it in our competency will vary, will be maybe a little more detailed. It might be a little more encompassing than what the task says. not all tasks are written equally in the
Okay.
DCWF. Some are written much more precisely, some are very wide. But in this case, fairly straightforward. You're installing a system, you're installing a service, or you're installing a server and configuring it.
And I wonder if it's worth mentioning there as well that we're using DCWF and we're using the NICE frameworks because they are established and they're developing as the ecosystem of cybersecurity changes. It's not our role when we're writing a competency statement to critique these frameworks. We're taking these frameworks as a given, as a tool that we're making use of as we're building those connections between the education we're providing to our students and employment.
Right, and that's not to say that either the DCWF or the NICE framework is a perfect document at all. It's just that's what we're agreeing on as the starting point. And,
yes.
And while both documents may have their, let's say, issues, they are fairly well thought out and encompassing of the tasks that need to be done. If you're able to find multiple tasks or tasks that you need to teach your students, and they don't exist anywhere in the DCWF or the NICE framework, you really need to write it down and let them know so they can incorporate it in the future revisions. I know both organizations are constantly updating this. As we speak, they're updating both documents. So it's just the frame of reference that we're working from.
Yes.
The next, so condition, I mentioned, I gave you the scenario. I explained the technology they were given, the documents they were given. Sometimes we'll say, well, what are the limitations? We might say, when we're talking about condition, we might say, okay, well, you can't use the internet, or you can't use documentation. For the capstone, there are no limitations. They can use anything. They can phone a friend. They have to do the work themselves, but I think that goes without saying. But they're able to use any reference or resource that's at their disposal. Personally, I also allow them the use of AI. They can use AI to help them troubleshoot or configure anything that they're working on. So that's condition. So that kind of encapsulates what they're doing. Student in a capstone class, working a team of 4, given a list of documents and a network that they have to work on. They have 10 weeks to get that network up and running to be ready for a pen test. If they pass the pen test, they are now able to make the system go live. So that's the scenario is they're trying to get the system ready so they can go live and then start selling their product, whatever it is. So now we move to degree. So how do I know if the student, what the student is doing? As you might be able to decipher from the way the capstone is run, all the students are doing many things and different things. And, arguably similar to the real world, each student is doing tasks from multiple work roles. And that's why we said earlier, don't worry too much about the work role you're teaching to the work role, and that student, nobody has to do all the tasks in a work role. It's just exposing them to different tasks. And again, when they go to the real world, whatever the job title they have may be a mixture of various tasks from different work roles in the frameworks that we use. So for the way the degree is measured is we're just looking for completeness. And what's completeness? The Active Directory has to pass a functionality check. Is the Active Directory running, right? So we look and see, is it actually running? Are the computers on the network all joined to the domain? And am I able to log into any of the computers, both Windows and Linux, using my domain account? And if so, that's a pass. And that requirement is complete. They have 12 weeks of the semester. They have about 10 weeks from start to finish to get this done, but that's not really accurate. I mean, it's 10 weeks, but it's this and all the other things. So when they have 10 weeks to do this, it's not that they're just doing this. And this kind of leads into the employability factor.
Okay.
So if a student is working in a team of 4 to get the Active Directory set up, that student has to work with the team and has to communicate with the other team members. So for example, if they're doing the Active Directory, another student is likely building the Linux server. Mm-hmm. That Linux server, in our case, winds up being a Red Hat server. And without getting too technical, what has to happen between the person running the Active Directory and doing the Red Hat, they have to communicate to make sure the Red Hat server is configured so it can join the domain properly. And that it's querying the Active Directory database for login. Mm-hmm. And that can't just, it doesn't happen automatically. There's a bit of a research that has to happen to make sure that works well. There's another machine that's Ubuntu. That one has to join the domain. The Windows 10 machines have to join the domain and so on. So that person that's running that has to talk to all the other students pretty much to make sure that Active Directory is A, going to work, and B, function the way it needs to with all the other machines. You know, the functionality check saying all the other machines are on the domain necessitates the person doing this task has to communicate with the other people working on the other machines and devices on the network.
So to be competent with this technical, you also need to have that ability to collaborate and communicate with everyone. Otherwise, you're not going to be
teamwork,
competent.
Collaborate, communicate, think critically. What's the order in which things need to be done? All of that, and it's baked in. It's not something that has to necessarily that I have to test. I know that if they got the machine to this level, there was no way they did it sitting in the corner of the room by themselves, not talking to anybody, right?
Okay. Can I ask, so you've been leading, chairing the competency working group, you've developed this template. Has it impacted your teaching at all? This identification of the task and the work role for B, the description of conditions, and then thinking about what kind of degree would evidence competency. Has that changed how you think about your teaching?
So one of the ways it impacts my teaching is instead of my thinking of what am I going to create as an experience for the student to do in a particular sequence to get to a particular endpoint, I'm thinking now more in terms of how do I set up the conditions for them to have to do real world work. How do I explain that better? I'm not saying, okay, for example, I could just say, okay, here's a computer, here's the disk for Active Directory, install Active Directory on this computer. And I can measure whether or not they know how to do the steps to install that Active Directory on that computer alone. That is about as unrealistic as it's ever going to be for somebody to install Active Directory. Active Directory by its nature is kind of the central point on a network. And so by saying, all right, you're working on a network with other students, other people, with other operating systems of varying degrees of update and patching, whatever, now you have to install it in that situation. And just by creating that condition, I've created a lot of other learning that has to take place that I could talk till I'm blue in the face saying, you need teamwork, you need to talk to the person, you need to plan, you need to make sure that you document what you're doing. I could tell people that, but until they go through it, and this is what happens, people go through it, they do the installation, they're like, oh, I installed the wrong version. Yeah. Okay, oh, I didn't, you know what, this version of Active Directory doesn't work, this version of Windows Server doesn't work properly with what you're trying to do for your database, your debate. And so because they didn't communicate properly, they have to start over. And this is the place to make those mistakes during this class.
Yes, absolutely. And then second thing I was going to ask, I know that I came to your workshop that you gave at NICE, in 2023, and it was standing room only. There were so many practitioners who wanted to hear you talking about this capstone class, and it was a great session. And now you've been working on your competency statement for that. And one of the things that we're doing with competency is working with SecureEd to develop an e-library of competency statements which practitioners within CAE community can share as a way of sharing good practice. I wonder, given that you've designed all of this yourself, do you worry at all about people plagiarizing your work or taking your ideas and using them yourself? Do you have any concerns?
Not in the least. The more people that do this, the more happier I am. And you know, I've had a lot of support from many folks out there helping me to the point that I'm at, and they've always given of their knowledge and skills freely. I think if there's anything I developed that anybody wants to use, I'm happy to share it with them. And I think that's the spirit that has been nurtured from the CAE community for a long time, you know, where we're all in this together, and whatever we can produce that's going to make not just our class a better experience for the students, but it's going to help other people, it's great.
And what would you say for those educators who don't feel quite comfortable with sharing things they've worked upon at length? If they write a competency statement based around their teaching, are they giving away things which perhaps they don't want to share? Is a way of writing a competency statement so that somebody can't just take ownership of their expertise?
I think what I would suggest, and you know, this is something, maybe it's up for discussion, but I would say if there's something that you're doing that you believe is so proprietary in terms of the nature of the information that's included, maybe it relates to research you're still developing and you don't want it out there, or maybe it relates to something else that maybe you have a contract you can't, but you really want the students to do it, then you should do that competency. Just don't submit that statement. You're still going to have to commit to writing other competencies, but you know, if there's something that you really feel like I'm not ready to share this, that's fine too. And also, the CAE community is one of the most amazing communities I've worked with. Everybody seems to be very supportive and interested, and so feel free to talk to anyone in the community and say, do you think I should submit this? Do you think, you know, and get some feedback and see what other people think.
Yes. I certainly love the idea of how much good practice is out there, and the idea of us being able to not necessarily harvest from that, but to be able to find inspiration from that. If we're all sitting in our ivory towers reinventing the wheel, that's a loss of wasted energy when we could actually be working together. So we've given an overview of our definition. Competency is the ability for the student to complete a task in the context of a work role. And we've outlined the essential elements: the who is the actor, what they're doing, the behavior, how they're doing it, the context, the story of how they're enacting that behavior. The degree, what expectations might an employer have around competency in relation to this behavior, the how much. And we've talked about employability and how those aspects of employability, those professional skills, are not a bolt-on when we think about competency. They're central to an understanding of what competency in the workplace looks like. And Vinny, you've given a great example from your capstone class. And we've also talked about the fact that the framework we have, we want to be agile, we want it to be flexible. We've chosen something that will speak to those stakeholders in policy, in employment, that will resonate with our students, and that it's something which becomes a way for educators to share good practice. Do competency statements only apply to classroom situations and classroom activities?
No. So one of the nice things about how we're encouraging the CAE community to develop statements is to look at other things as well as the classroom. Certainly, there should be you should have some come out of the classroom, but competitions are a great way for students to gain experience that many employers are looking for. So competitions can be a good one. Apprenticeships, internships, all can wind up having some competency elements to it that you might be able to articulate. You might even have some club activities. It depends on the club, how the activity is organized, and if you can do it. But there might be things that even there you might be able to extract competency statements.
So potentially we could have competency statements which related to any of the experiences that our students have been able to access through being a member of our course.
Correct.
But they're not necessarily within the teaching that we're doing. It could be peripheral activities, extracurricular, co-curricular.
Right, and when you're developing the competencies, you want to use the sense that God gave a goose.
The sense that God gave a goose.
Yes. So, for example, if you're creating a competency for a competition and you have 400 people in your cyber program, but only 6 people are in the competition, that's not really a competency statement that would be appropriately apply that your students are getting in your program, right? If it's a competition where a large percentage of your students are all participating in, then perhaps you could use that, right? So you just want to be honest with the competency statements that you're creating, such that you're saying this is the kind of competency the students are coming away with after being in the program. Now, what does that mean exactly? Well, your measure is, if you show the competency to a goose, they'll be like, yes, that works. But
excellent. And we've talked a lot today about student, and I know that the way that you think about the overall arc of where we're going with competency statement is ultimately to empower our students, to provide the student with the currency they need to be able to get a job. Can you explain how thinking about competency, using our definition, breaking it down into these 5 elements of A, B, C, D, E, benefits the student's employability?
So, kind of like looking at a task statement from, I want to say from farm to table, but that doesn't really work. But if we look at the DCWF and the NICE framework and the list of tasks that are in there, and we can reasonably assume that these tasks are good descriptions of the kinds of things employers want to hire people to be able to do, then when we extract tasks that we think we can create competencies around, from the DCWF and the NICE framework, and we create our competency statement that describes the experience the students are getting, we implement that activity and the students go through that experience, the next thing that we want to do with the students is to get them to actually reflect upon that event and what they did, how they did it, and learn how to articulate it. Mm-hmm. And one of the methods for articulating how you've approached a problem or situation in tech has been something called the STAR method. Many organizations use it. I know government agencies that have shared with me that they expect people to use this. It's called the STAR method. The STAR method is situation, task, action, result. And the STAR method, as it would turn out, for the most part, fits almost hand in glove with the ABCDE model. So if you look at situation, that's condition, mm-hmm. right? Our context. Task is whatever the task was, right, from the NICE framework. Results are D&E, degree in employability, but the action is the student story.
Okay.
What they actually experienced, how they negotiated the obstacles of what they were experiencing when they were told, hey, you're working in a team of 4, you don't know anyone else, nobody has experience doing this particular thing, you have to figure out how to do it, but also make it work with everybody else. And this person wasn't around, this person, all that stuff becomes part of their story that they need to learn how to articulate.
Yes.
The other thing I find is, and I think I've heard other professors have the same observation, is students will do fantastic things and then not know how and not think it was as great as it was, or that they did as many things as they did, right? So this gives them a chance to reflect on, not only did you do something great, you had to do several things, and all of these are things that are important that employers are looking for. And so using the STAR method has been very helpful for getting the students to reflect and organize their thoughts. In fact, one of the things I tell them is, a lot of times when you're going for a job interview, when you're sitting across a desk from someone who is going to make a decision whether or not you're going to make a lot of money and now be able to move out of the house from mom and dad, when there's a lot riding on it, you tend to freeze, and you can't think as clearly, or you start to babble. If you can at least remember how to spell STAR, you can at least say, okay, situation, let me explain the situation. I was in this class, I did it, and you can explain the situation. What we had to do was the task, explain the task. Here's how we went about it, action. And then these were the results. I got this done, we passed the pen test, everybody was happy. And so it's been a very good tool, a very simple tool, and something that I think anybody can use. For what it's worth, if any of the CAE community schools has a different method called the RAST method or whatever they call it, that's fine. This is just a tool that we offer to say you can use to help them articulate. And here's the thing I want to kind of draw the circle, right? So if the employers are saying we need to hire folks and we need to be able to do these tasks, as you create the experience around the task, and then the student experiences it, when they're able to articulate it, they're going to basically be able to speak to the employer in the language that they need. As we articulated earlier, we want to try and get a language that we both, that educators and employers can understand each other.
Yes.
If they can articulate to the employer how they were able to perform the tasks they're looking to hire for, it's a full circle.
And I'm a big fan of this joined up thinking as well. So when we think about the research that you had done at the career fairs, the idea of people, students not knowing the work roles, the ABCDE method, the investment in competency alongside the teaching that we're doing, provides a way for students to have a better understanding of the work roles they might do, so they can gain self-efficacy. They can think about the kind of work roles to which they want to apply upon graduating. As you say, for our employers are being provided with a more informed student body. The students aren't going to turn up looking good on paper because they have the knowledge and skills, but lacking awareness of tasks and work roles. As you say, they will have that language to be able to speak to, that understanding of what this work role would entail, and to be able to reflect upon the tasks they've done already, which might fit them into that. That's also a good way of getting past the experience requirement that so many employers currently have, because employers are saying having the knowledge and skills isn't enough. You also need to show that you have experience. If we can bring that experience into the degree, there isn't that unemployability factor for our graduating students, that fact they're not managing to get onto the career ladder. And we're also talking about how to share best practice across educators. And I think within this as well, the educators are the experts here as well.
Mm-hmm.
A well-trained student presumably can go with up-to-date best practices into the workplace and potentially renew the workplace and bring that expertise from education into workplace. We're not just serving the employers, we're thinking about this multi-directional communication which we're building.
Exposing students to different competency experiences, you're already getting them to be able to articulate, oh, that's what a system administrator does. Oh, that's what an IT auditor does. Oh, that's what a program manager does. So they can start to think, oh yeah, I really love program management. I love organizing. Oh, I did this Active Directory. I'll never do it again. It was a pain, and it's not for me, right? I can do it, but I don't want to do it. Like that's some of the stuff that you hear the students say. And sometimes the student knowing what they don't want to do is almost as important as knowing what they want to do, right?
I would hate the idea of our students going into a cybersecurity position they hate and doing that for the next 40 or 50 years.
They'll never last that long. I don't think they'll last that long.
We're nearly at the end of our training video now, and I think one of the last things that I'd like to ask you about, Vinny, is how we can really build up this joined up thinking. We thought about this linear process where we can embed the behavior, that awareness of work roles and tasks into our teaching in a way that our students can then articulate what they've done at the point of an interview and have that self-efficacy. And we thought a lot about how to engage between educators and employers. I wonder if there are other aspects to this joined up thinking as well.
So obviously for any endeavor to be successful, you need to communicate and have teamwork. And so just like we're trying to get the students to exhibit teamwork and communication, the faculty and staff at different schools need to also be able to articulate. So members of the CAE community need to communicate with the other faculty and maybe get them to understand what the value or benefit might be of implementing a competency experience in their classroom. Certainly if you can get the deans and the department chairs to buy in, also help, because if they know if the dean is interested, then so will the faculty. Now, how do you get the dean interested? Well, a lot of the stuff that we've talked about with, for example, the stuff we've talked about with developing these competencies fit well with a ABET accreditation.
Okay.
And you talk accreditation, sometimes deans' ears perk up, and then they're like, oh, if that could help, let's see if we can do that.
So it's already seen as good practice within educational institutions.
Absolutely.
We're not suggesting bringing something in from the outside which hasn't been thought of before.
Exactly. Having partnerships with employers might be useful too. So if you understand what they're looking for, you can create competency experiences around that and then have that dialogue with them so they can also help you validate the experiences that you're creating.
And every CAE institution has an advisory board with some employer representation on it.
That's correct.
Okay. And something as simple as the definition that we have and A, B, C, D, E can potentially contribute to this kind of joined up thinking.
Absolutely. From the start, the competency working group stuck to, let's keep it simple, let's make sure it's operational, we can actually implement it, but that the return on investment will be significant. And so I think the model that we have exhibits that. And to wit, anytime we've shared this with educators, they've taken to it fairly quickly. There might be an initial like, I'm not sure, but then as they understood it, they took to it. Other organizations have looked at this and have been thinking about adopting or absorbing the model in some respects. So I think that's an indication that we're kind of on the right track. We're talking about competency, but we're keeping it simple so that people can understand it and implement it in their situation as best that's best for their situation.
So let's finish up then, Vinny, by telling people what they can do if they want to know more. I know that we have an e-handbook which is available, and we've got the address on this slide now. If people are curious about what we're doing or would like to know a little bit more, they're able to access that e-handbook and have a look. What other ways are we supporting the educators in CAE community?
Wow, you'll have to help me on this. I know, so we have a competency constructor website, a place where you can up and create your competencies there. So it kind of walks you through what the elements are, or you can look at competencies that other people have created. There'll be a library so you can look at.
Yeah.
We have monthly competency corner talks. So about a 15-minute talk on different aspects of competency will happen once a month.
And that's done through CAE Community of Practice meeting.
We have a working group. If you're like, wow, this is great, I want to be part of it, you can contact either Zoe or I and get someone to join that.
And our working group is a nice example of policymakers and educators across the CAE.
And we have a cadre of newly minted trainers. So if you wanted someone to come out to your institution, or you wanted to set up a Zoom session or something like that with a trainer, we might be able to do that and help you along, and answer some of the questions you might have.
We've also brought in links here to the DCWF framework and the NICE framework. As we've said, cybersecurity is a rapidly evolving environment. New threats are emerging. Living documents, which may change over time. It's always good to see the updates there. And we've also put our own professional emails on this. That you have, you're very welcome to contact and connect with either myself or Vinny.
And CAE is for the Center of Academic Excellence, and the emphasis is on excellence. And the spirit in which we share this with you has been with the hopes that by thinking about competency, addressing some of the ways we might develop a competency statement and share with the community, will ultimately impact the students in a positive way and actually help make the education that we provide the students even more excellent. This is what we're about, is excellence. And we do really welcome any feedback on that we can live up to the term excellence. So, thank you.
Thank you for watching our video.